Dust swirled in the sun-kissed air as Silas rode into town, his horse's hooves crunching against the gravel. Shadows of towering mountains loomed behind him, echoing his solitude. At the town gate, a small bundle stirred. A girl, no more than 10, with tangled hair framing her pale face. Clutched in her tiny hands, a crumpled note whispered of abandonment. Silas dismounted, heart heavy with an ache he thought long buried. He knelt beside her, eyes searching for understanding in her wide, silent gaze. Elowen's lips parted, but no words came, her silence a mirror of his own grief. As he reached for the note, recognition washed over him, each letter igniting memories of laughter now silenced. The unmistakable handwriting struck like a lightning bolt, piercing the solitude that wrapped around his heart. In that moment, the weight of the past collided with the promise of an uncertain future. The sun dipped low behind the jagged silhouette of the distant mountains, casting elongated shadows that danced like specters across the dust-laden earth. Elowen stood at the town gate, the wooden planks hot beneath her bare feet. A limp scrap of fabric hung around her shoulders, barely shielding her from the biting evening chill. She clutched a crumpled piece of paper in her trembling fingers, its edges frayed like her resolve. The simple scrawl on the note had burned into her memory, filled with the words of betrayal. "Sold for debts. Do not look for me." Her brother's handwriting, the same hand that had once sketched her dreams with stories of golden fields and free-spirited horses, now condemned her to this fate. The townsfolk whispered as they passed, their eyes avoiding her like the plague, their pity mingling with disgust in a toxic cocktail she could not stomach. With every breath, the weight of her brother's choice bore down on her, a palpable wound that carved deeper than any blade. She felt invisible, a ghost wandering through a life that no longer claimed her. Silas rode into town on a chestnut horse, the rhythmic thud of hooves echoing in the stillness. A widower adorned in layers of weathered leather, the lines on his face told stories of love lost and grief carried like a brand. He came seeking purpose in a world that felt less familiar with every passing day. The flicker of curiosity pulled him toward the gate, where the young girl stood, a silhouette against the vibrant orange sky. There was something haunting in the way her eyes sank into shadows, an innocence crushed under the weight of the world. He dismounted, the dust swirling around his worn boots, and approached cautiously. The townspeople's whispers swirled with rumors about the girl, fueling the fire of his hesitation. Yet, the moment their eyes locked, everything shifted. Elowen's gaze was like the barren landscape after a storm, yearning for relief, but stripped bare of hope. Something in Silas stirred, a distant echo of compassion and a flash of recognition that he couldn't place. He couldn't avoid feeling the hollow ache in her presence, a mirror reflecting the jagged edges of his own loss. Elowen stood unmoving, a statue of despair forged in the flames of abandonment. As Silas reached out, his hand hovering just above her shoulder, she recoiled, fear knitting her brow tighter than the fabric of her makeshift covering. In that moment, he understood her instinct to withdraw, an instinct born from a life marked by betrayal. He lowered his hand slowly, the gesture meant to convey safety, but instead amplified the distance yawning between them. Two souls, fractured and alone in this vast, indifferent world. "What's your name, girl?" he asked, his voice low and steady, yet it felt like an intrusion. She hesitated, her thoughts tangled with the remnants of her brother's betrayal. The name felt foreign on her tongue, a label that no longer fit. Here she was nothing more than a transaction, the currency of her existence exchanged for debts that had never been hers. Yet, with a deep breath, she mustered the courage to respond, the words slipping through her lips like a whispered secret. "Elowen," she breathed, the name awkward and heavy, tinged with the weight of the past and the uncertainty of the future. Silas nodded, though the sound of her name did little to bridge the chasm between them. He felt a swell of protective instinct, but knew that pity could do little to mend the rift in her heart. He was a man who had learned the price of sorrow, and while he could offer her the faint flicker of kindness, it wouldn't erase the scars she carried. Silas studied her, taking in the way her shoulders slumped under a burden too great for such a young frame. It reminded him of all he had lost, the warmth of shared laughter, the simple joy of companionship, the dreams of what could have been if tragedy hadn't swept through like a winter storm. He felt a twinge of longing, a desire to change her fate. But what could he offer? A life still shrouded in his own grief seemed insufficient. With a sigh that poured like autumn leaves, he turned away, glancing back to the town, where life continued to pulse around them, a world painted in vibrant colors, oblivious to the two darkened figures at its edge. In the distance, a lonesome wind howled through the canyons, carrying with it the remnants of their shared solitude. Silas walked away, leaving Elowen standing at the gate, the note still clutched in her hand, two intertwined souls sealed behind an impenetrable wall of emotional distance. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting a warm golden glow that clashed with the chill in the air as Elowen stepped onto the weathered porch of the ranch. The wooden boards creaked under her weight, a symphony of nostalgia that echoed the stories of countless souls who had come before her. Silas stood a few paces away, his silhouette sharp against the fading light, a shadow of a man carved from stoic rock and sorrow. She could feel the weight of his gaze, heavy with unspoken words and untold histories, yet the space between them felt insurmountable. Elowen turned, clutching the frayed edges of her shawl around her shoulders, seeking warmth that eluded her in this new place. The vastness of the land stretched out before her, punctuated by the rugged hills that framed the horizon. She took a step forward, her boots crunching on the gravel, an unfamiliar cadence that reminded her of how far she had drifted from everything she once knew. Silas remained silent, his eyes fixed on a distant point, as if the world around him had grown muted, too heavy for the heart to bear. The air was thick with unspoken fears and the scent of dried earth, and Elowen felt the shadows of loneliness creeping in. The modest structure that would be her new home loomed behind her, a testament to endurance weathered by time and the elements. It stood resolute against the encroaching twilight, just as she hoped to be. Yet each breath she took felt like an intrusion into the stillness that enveloped them, a fragile disruption to the quietude Silas had cultivated around him. Inside, the ranch was sparse but functional. Elowen's fingers traced the contours of worn furniture, the rough-hewn surfaces telling stories of lives lived and dreams forged in the fires of hardship. A small table sat in the corner, a faded oil lamp resting atop it, waiting for the tender touch of warmth to ignite its flicker. She turned to find Silas standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable, his hands tucked deep into the pockets of his weathered jeans. The light from the room pooled around him, but he seemed to stand apart, shrouded in the shadows of his past. "Dinner's ready," he finally said, his voice low and gravelly, slicing through the silence like a knife. Elowen nodded, a small movement that felt monumental in the stillness. She followed him into the small kitchen where a meager meal awaited, steam rising from a pot of beans simmering on the stove. Simple sustenance, yet it carried with it an unfamiliar comfort. Silas dished out portions, his movements efficient but devoid of flourish, as if every gesture was weighed by the loss that clung to him. As they sat at the table, the ticking of a clock echoed in the background, each second amplifying the distance between them. Elowen focused on her meal, the beans slipping down her throat like bittersweet realization. Silas's eyes flickered toward her occasionally, a fleeting glance that seemed to hold the weight of entire conversations unspoken. She could feel the air thickening with his restraint, a dam holding back an ocean of grief tethered to the memory of a life once lived, once loved. After dinner, Elowen began to clean up, her movements driven by a sense of purpose. Silas lingered, leaning against the counter, watching her with a complexity she could barely decipher. He was a mountain of a man forged by years of toil and solitude, Yet beneath that rugged exterior lay depths of emotion that seemed both captivating and terrifying. She found herself wondering what storms had shaped him, what memories haunted his sleep, and why the weight of the note that had brought her here felt like an anchor more than a lifeline. The silence stretched between them like an unbridgeable chasm, and Elowen could almost hear the echoes of their shared solitude. She stole a glance in his direction, uncertainty swirling in her stomach. It was in that moment she caught sight of the scar on his hand, a jagged reminder of a past that had left its imprint. The tenderness she felt for him, unexpected and raw, threatened to unravel the tight grip she had on her own heartache. As night fell and darkness wrapped around the ranch like a familiar blanket, Elowen settled into her small room. She lay in the bed, the sheets cold against her skin, staring at the ceiling as a million thoughts cascaded through her mind. Silas lingered on the periphery of her thoughts, his presence both soothing and unsettling. Here, in this quiet space, she wrestled with the duality of hope and despair, wondering if perhaps, in the stillness of this desolate ranch, they might unearth the remnants of their own futures together. The dawn crept over the horizon, casting soft hues of gold and crimson across the vast expanse of the prairie. Silas stood at the threshold of his weathered cabin, the chill of early morning air biting at his skin. A pot of coffee bubbled on the fire, sending tendrils of steam into the crisp atmosphere. Elowen slept inside, wrapped in the quilt he had laid over her the night before, her breath steady and even. It was a comfort he had not experienced in years, the presence of another soul offering warmth against the solitude of his widowhood. As the sun rose higher, the morning routine began. Silas moved with the rhythm of the land, the way he had learned from a young age. He stoked the fire and set out to collect the chickens from their coop. Elowen stirred, her soft groans blending with the clucking of the hens. Glancing back, he caught a fleeting glimpse of her tangled hair and the way the light caught her delicate features. There was innocence in the way she woke, still half dreaming, untouched by the harsh realities of the world outside. "Coffee's ready," he called, trying to keep his voice casual, but a part of him tinged with unspoken hope. She emerged slowly, rubbing the sleep from her eyes, and his heart flickered at the sight of her small frame, still so fragile yet filled with a quiet resilience. They shared a pot of coffee on the porch, the world stretching out before them like an unmade bed, with winds whispering secrets and time floating suspended between the two of them. Elowen's laughter rang out as Silas tripped over the bucket, knocking it over in his attempt to carry the eggs. It was a sound he had long forgotten, the lightness of it almost foreign. Yet he felt a pull at the edges of his mind, a shadow that darkened the warmth. She was just a girl, a mystery bound by a letter, yet the connection they were forging felt far more profound. It scared him. He had sworn never to open his heart again, and yet here it was, cracking ever so slightly. In the days that followed, they fell into a routine that blurred the lines of their newfound companionship. They worked side by side, mending fences and tending to the land, Silas teaching her the ways of survival in the rough terrain. He watched her grow stronger each day, her hands becoming calloused, her confidence blooming like the wildflowers that adorned the prairie. Yet, amidst the laughter, he felt the weight of the unsaid things pressing between them. Each shared glance simmered with an undercurrent of unacknowledged emotion, the distance of his past looming like a spectre. At night, Silas would find himself lying awake, the darkness whispering secrets he had buried deep. He would replay the note that had come with Elowen, a simple message that had brought her to him, yet the handwriting lingered like a haunting melody. He confided in her about his life before, the loss that had carved out the hollow place in his heart, allowing them to edge closer to a truth he felt too fearful to confront. And with every revelation, he could see a flicker of understanding in her eyes, but also a shadow of her own uncertainty. Elowen, too, wrestled with her feelings, the pull between a longing for the familiar and the thrill of the unknown. She was drawn to Silas's quiet strength, but the weight of her past held her back, preventing her from fully embracing the sanctuary he offered. When she sat beside him on the porch, sharing stories of her fleeting memories, she felt a growing sense of warmth and safety that both exhilarated and terrified her. The burden of her unknown origins clawed at her, the thought of facing Silas with the truth gnawing within. One evening, while the sun dipped low and painted the sky in strokes of violet and gold, Elowen plucked up the courage to speak. "Silas." She hesitated, the words catching in her throat. "What if I'm not what you want? What if I'm just a reminder of everything you've lost?" The vulnerability in her voice sliced through the quiet night, and Silas turned to her, the weight of her words settling heavily between them. "I don't know what I want anymore," he admitted, raw honesty spilling from his lips as he searched her eyes for any glimpse of reassurance. "But I do know that you've brought something back into my life that I thought I buried. You're not a reminder to me, Elowen. You're a chance." Silence enveloped them, a fragile moment where hope and fear intertwined, each hesitating to step fully into the light of what could be, leaving the shadows of their pasts just outside the door. The sunlight slashed through the dusty window panes of Silas's cabin, carving the room into golden rectangles. Elowen sat at the small wooden table, her fingers tracing the edges of the note she had read so many times. The words had become a familiar breath, yet still they gnawed at her. The familiar strokes of handwriting, each curve and line lighting up the shadows lurking deep within her heart. Silas had turned away, fully occupied with the chores of the day, his broad shoulders moving rhythmically as he worked. She had long since learned that he threw himself into tasks to mask his own struggles, but the unspoken tension hung between them like a storm cloud waiting to burst. "Do you think she meant to leave me?" Elowen's voice broke the stillness around them, soft yet heavy with uncertainty. She didn't expect Silas to answer. She hadn't meant to articulate the thought. But it slipped out, unbidden, like a secret exposed to the air. What she truly wanted was to hear him refute it, to pull her close and assure her that she was as deserving of love as the world had once promised. Instead, silence hung thick in the air, a silence that spoke volumes about the past both had left behind, his wrapped tightly in loss, hers shrouded in abandonment. Silas paused, hands stilled against the wood, and she felt it then, a shift as if the very ground beneath their feet trembled with things left unsaid. The way he turned, just slightly, revealed more than she anticipated. A flicker of vulnerability crossed his rugged features, an unexpected openness that set her heart racing. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "People do things for reasons we can't understand." He looked down, and she saw the weight of his own solitude mirrored in his eyes. Elowen's breath caught in her throat. The pain of his past whispered around them, the untold sorrow of his late wife mingling with her own turmoil. "You lost her," she ventured gently, the words slipping through her lips like a prayer. "Was it sudden?" The question lingered in the air, heavy with the echoes of long-forgotten dreams, and she bravely leaned forward, searching Silas's gaze for a glimmer of connection. A pain shot through Silas's eyes, deep and raw, as if he were forced to relive moments he wished to bury. One moment she was there, he recalled, voice thickening, and the next, everything crumbled like dry earth. He hesitated, a storm brewing in the depths of his soul, and Elowen felt the air electrify with unspoken emotions. "She left me with nothing but questions," he added, a single tear betraying the facade he fought to maintain. "Sometimes I feel like the ghost of her haunts this place," he confessed, barely meeting her gaze. Elowen's heart ached at the fractures she saw beneath his stoicism, recognizing the similarities in their shared loneliness. She too was a ghost of another life, her past blurred on the edges, and in that moment, both their lives collided in an explosion of vulnerability. She reached out tentatively, fingertips brushing against the back of his hand, the warmth igniting a flicker of understanding that spread through the silence. "Silas," she breathed, her voice trembling. And at that moment, the weight of unuttered words threatened to spill over. She felt an overwhelming urge to share the truth hidden behind the note she clutched so dearly. Could it be that the very handwriting that had tethered her so painfully to the past now held a chance for a new beginning? The thought clashed with her fear, the hesitation of a girl marking a new chapter in a man's life who had just begun to navigate his grief. He looked up then, his gaze searing and unguarded, yet too much remained unsaid. Silas swallowed, the unspoken words hanging heavy on his lips, and she felt the space between them pulsating like a heartbeat. Was there room for both of them to heal, to rediscover love in the wake of their sorrow? Or were they destined to remain broken, two lost souls wandering through a world that had cast them aside? With a sudden lurch of hope, Elowen grasped for his hand, entwining her fingers with his, the very act pulling them into a fragile solace against the tempest of their histories. It was a meager gesture, yet as they sat together, Silas's breath evened out, and Elowen found comfort in the fact that despite ghosts lingering in the shadows, they were both alive. Alive enough to breathe, alive enough to feel, alive enough to create a new story together, even if the road would be fraught with uncertainty. The sun hung low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the dusty main street of the small town. Silas, standing at the threshold of the saloon, felt the weight of Elowen's gaze upon him as she sat upon the porch steps. The dim light flickered against the wooden boards, revealing a nervous fidgeting in her fingers, the delicate dance of uncertainty that echoed his own heart. Outside, the world felt impossibly still, as if even the wind hesitated to intrude upon the fragile moment between them. Elowen's brow knitted together as she picked at the edges of her worn dress, each tug a reminder of her solitary journey. Silas's heart stirred with a bizarre mix of protectiveness and longing. He brushed a hand through his tousled hair, a gesture both habitual and revealing as he moved to close the distance between them. She looked up, her big, searching eyes filled with a softness he had not anticipated. In that moment, awareness dawned on him. This girl, with her timid smile and trembling hands, had become a light in his shadowy existence. As he approached, the setting sun enveloped them in a warm glow, the golden hues dancing in her hair, turning it to spun gold. Silas knelt beside her, their eyes level yet worlds apart. He felt that distance deeply, not just the years that had carved lines into his face, but the loss that had hollowed a space in his heart. The crumpled note still lingered between them, unspoken yet resonating in the silence. Something beneath the surface connected them, and it sent a shiver down his spine, awakening emotions he had buried long ago. "Do you want to go for a ride?" The question slipped from his lips, rustic and simple, yet laden with the weight of shared experiences. Silas reached his hand out, offering an invitation that felt more like a lifeline. Elowen hesitated, a flicker of doubt crossing her features. But then, in a moment that felt like both an eternity and a heartbeat, she nodded slowly, her resolve solidifying like the ground beneath them. The shy smile that broke across her face ignited something dormant within him, pulling him closer to the warmth emanating from her spirit. They made their way to the barn, the air thick with the earthy scent of hay mixed with leather. Elowen watched Silas with keen interest as he prepared the horse, his movements filled with a grace that belied his rugged exterior. She marveled at how his strong hands worked with care, saddling the mare with a tenderness that caught her off guard. The connection she felt to him began to transcend the boundaries of her former life, whispering promises of comfort and understanding. She found herself yearning to know the man behind the quiet strength, the stories etched in the lines of his face. As they mounted the horse, the world around them transformed into a blur of colors and sounds, a release from their individual burdens. Silas held the reins while Elowen settled behind him, the warmth of her body pressing against his back, sending a surge of momentum through his soul. They rode out, the rhythmic pounding of hooves echoing like a heartbeat on the open trail, and in that moment, nothing else mattered. The sky stretched endlessly before them, a canvas of soft pinks and purples, and the vastness seemed to cradle their newfound connection. Silas felt Eloan lean in slightly, her breath warm against his ear as she whispered tales of her life before the town gate. Her voice, though soft, was steady with courage, imbued with a hope that resonated deeply within him. Each word she spoke opened windows to her heart, revealing a landscape of dreams and fears that mirrored his own. In listening to her, he found pieces of himself, a reflection in her eyes, a thread of shared grief woven into the fabric of their conversation. The ride led them to a small glen, the sun dipping lower, bathing them in twilight. They dismounted, and as Eloan stepped away from the horse, she turned to face Silas. In that softening light, she reached for the hem of her dress, dusting off the remnants of their journey. The gesture felt profound, as if she were shedding the weight of her past, revealing the girl she wished to be. Silas's heart raced at her vulnerability, the recognition of their shared loneliness and desire for connection echoing loudly within him. As the stars began to twinkle in the deepening sky, Silas took a step closer, his heart urging him forward. He reached out to tuck a loose strand of hair behind Eloan's ear, an innocent gesture, yet it spoke volumes, hinting at the depth of feeling shyly simmering between them. Her breath caught, her surprise transforming into a gentle smile that lit up her entire face, and Silas felt a warmth bloom in his chest, a fire igniting in the space where grief had once resided. They stood together, two souls finding solace in a world that had left them adrift, a promise of something beautiful beginning to unfold. Eloan sat at the edge of the porch, the wooden slats creaking under her small frame. Sunlight filtered through the trees, casting dappled shadows across her face, but she felt a heaviness in her heart that was not so easily lightened. The vast expanse of the ranch spread out before her, but it held no allure today. Instead, her gaze lingered on the distant horizon, where the sky melted into hues of orange and pink, reminiscent of the warmth she sought yet feared to grasp. Silas's presence inside the cabin was both a comfort and a reminder of everything that had shifted in her young life. Days had passed since Silas took her in, a widowed cowboy who wore his grief like a second skin. Her silence seemed to echo through the air, wrapping itself around them both like a heavy quilt. She wanted to tell him about her dreams, to share fragments of her world before the note had led her to him, but the words clung to her throat as tightly as the pain of her past. The memory of her mother's careful script, the last invisible thread tying her to that fleeting life, made the effort feel insurmountable. As Silas busied himself with his chores, Eloan's gaze shifted to the worn photographs hanging on the cabin walls, moments of laughter, echoes of a life now intangible. A longing stirred within her, battling against the instinct to remain silent. What would he say if she spoke? Would he see her as a burden or as someone worth caring for? She had witnessed the remnants of his sorrow. Understanding flickered within her, but fear weighed heavily on her small shoulders. In the quiet moments while Silas worked, Eloan felt a pull toward him, a magnetism that sparked the need to cross the invisible gulf between them. She could see him wipe the sweat from his brow, muscles taut against the fabric of his shirt, a man shaped by both hardship and resilience. His eyes often drifted toward the horizon, as if searching for something that had been lost. Did he, too, feel the weight of unspoken words hanging in the air like the thick dust that settled along the earth? She picked at the hem of her dress, fidgeting with the fabric, the action grounding her swirling thoughts. The yearning to speak bubbled up inside her like a brook bursting its banks. Could she tarnish the moment they shared, the sanctuary they had unknowingly created between them? With the sun dipping lower behind the tall pines, the golden hour cast a warm glow that beckoned her forward. She inhaled deeply, willing the courage to unfurl within her. "Silas," she finally called, the name trembling on her lips like an unfamiliar melody. His head snapped up, a mixture of surprise and hope reflected in his features as he turned to face her. The moment hung suspended, a fragile thread weaving their hearts together in the fading light. The barren silence of the day shattered, allowing room for something new to blossom. "Yeah?" The sound of his voice, steady yet tender, wrapped around her like a blanket. He stepped closer, curiosity etched in every line of his face, attention trained solely on her. In that moment, Eloan felt the weight of all the unspoken words rushing through her like a stampede. Memories of the note flooded back, its ink swirling in her mind as she fought for the right words to escape her lips. The words tangled and twisted, a daughter's love intertwined with a sense of loss, the horizon of her future dimmed by shadows of her past. But the urgency to express herself burned brighter than the fear. "I know you've lost someone, and I don't want to be just the girl left at the gate. I want to be someone who can help you, too." Eloan's heart raced, hoping that her vulnerability had planted a seed of connection between them. Silas stood there, a silence pregnant with possibility stretching between them like an untraveled road. In that moment, she realized she did not need to be defined by her past, nor did he need to carry the weight of his alone. Each one a fragment of the other's story, they stood on the precipice of something infinite, the bonds of their separate grief beginning to weave into a shared tapestry. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the dusty ground as Eloan stood by the wooden fence, her fingers grazing the rough wood. She had spent countless hours staring into the vast field beyond, where blue and gold merged into a horizon of possibilities. The wildflowers danced in the evening breeze, a stark contrast to the storm brewing in her heart. Tonight, the air felt charged, as if the world was holding its breath in anticipation. Silas was just inside the barn, the faint sounds of wood scraping against wood echoing softly, the rhythmic thump of his hammer marking time like a heartbeat. Silas had been lost since that fateful day when he found her at the town gate. Her world reduced to a simple note that spoke of abandonment. It had taken time, patience, and 1,000 unspoken words for him to embrace the unexpected bond that had blossomed between them. The scars of his own past were still fresh, a patchwork of heartache woven into the fabric of his being. Yet Eloan had slowly chipped away at the fortress he had built around his heart. Her laughter was like sunlight breaking through clouds, illuminating parts of him he thought had remained forever in shadow. Tonight, however, something felt different in the air. With each swing of Silas's hammer, Eloan felt the weight of silence pressing down on her, a reminder that words left unspoken could be as heavy as the world itself. She glanced toward the barn doors, imagining the dust motes swirling in the golden light as Silas worked, his focused expression a stark contrast to the tumult inside her. She wanted to tell him. The truth clawed at her throat, a wild beast desperate to escape. But the right moment had never felt like it had come. As the last rays of sunlight faded, Silas stepped out of the barn, wiping the sweat from his brow. He leaned against the fence beside her, their shoulders nearly touching, the distance between them both alluring and painful. "You ever think about leaving this place?" he asked, his voice low and gravelly. Eloan turned to him, surprised. The question stirred something deep within her, a longing to run, to escape the confines of expectations. But at the same time, she felt rooted here, in the warmth of his presence. "I think about it," she murmured, her heart racing, "but I don't know where I would go." Silas's gaze lingered on her, eyes piercing through the remnants of the day, searching for something she couldn't yet reveal. In that moment, Eloan felt as if the universe itself had paused, allowing her to gather the fragments of courage floating just beneath the surface. "I'm afraid of being forgotten," she whispered, the vulnerability spilling from her lips like a confession. As he met her gaze, something shifted between them, a charged silence that spoke volumes. His brow furrowed, as if he could read the turmoil etched on her features. "You are not forgotten. You might feel lost sometimes, but you are here now with me," he replied, his voice a soothing balm against her fears. Ellawen felt the first spark of hope ignite within her, glimmering with the promise of vulnerability. "Silas," she finally breathed, allowing his name to escape, a soft sigh steeped in longing. "Silas," she repeated louder, and the weight of it hung in the air like a fragile promise. It was the name she had hesitated to speak, the tether binding her to him. As she uttered his name, she felt the walls she had built around her heart begin to crumble, one stone at a time. Silas turned fully to her, the confusion melting away as understanding settled in. Ellawen saw the flicker of recognition in his eyes, the dawning realization that they were bound not just by circumstance, but by something deeper. "You are mine, Ellawen," he replied, the raw emotion in his voice sending shivers down her spine. "I don't want you to feel afraid anymore. I want you to know the truth. This place, it's not just a home. It's us." The weight of those words lay heavy, each syllable weaving into the fabric of their connection. She stepped closer, her heart in her throat, trembling like the leaves in the wind, making the leap from trepidation to acceptance. In that electric moment, silence enveloped them. Ellawen took a deep breath, the air thick with unspoken promises. She had feared the loss of herself in the swirl of emotions, but now she realized that there was strength in vulnerability. As she stood before him, their shared gaze bridged the chasm of their pasts, the scars no longer an obstacle, but a tapestry woven through their journey. In that instant, everything shifted. The weight of sorrow and fear replaced by something far more profound, the quiet strength of love. Silas stood at the edge of the vast expanse, the setting sun painting the horizon in hues of copper and gold. The wind whispered through the tall grass, a gentle caress as Ellawen knelt beside him, fingers tracing the note that had brought them together. The faded ink seemed to shimmer in the fading light, each loop and swirl a heartbeat of a past long buried. He shifted closer, their shoulders brushing, a silent acknowledgement of unspoken truths. A lone hawk circled above, tracing the sky as if searching for something lost, a mirror of their own journey through grief and hope. Ellawen's breath hitched softly, her gaze locked on the fading sun, while Silas, heart swelling with a mix of longing and resolve, reached out, intertwining their fingers. In that moment, time folded around them, the cacophony of life silencing to a tender hum. Nature held its breath, the world shrinking to the warmth of their clasped hands. The last rays of sunlight danced upon Ellawen's face, illuminating the shadow of sorrow that had lingered too long. Silas squeezed gently, a promise unspoken, as night draped itself around them, a blanket of healing woven from shared silence and the understanding that tomorrow would bring the dawn.